In the final months of World War II, as the skies over Europe filled with the smoke of collapsing empires and exhausted air forces, one American pilot would attempt something no Allied airman had ever dared to try. This is the story of Major Richard Peterson, a P-51 Mustang ace who believed that limits were meant to be broken. German engineers, test pilots, and commanders insisted that no American fighter could operate effectively above 40,000 feet. They were certain that the extreme cold, the thin air, and the failing engines would keep Allied aircraft trapped far below the rarefied altitudes where the Luftwaffe's newest secret weapon, the Focke-Wulf Ta-152H, roamed with impunity. But on March 17, 1945, Peterson prepared to prove them wrong. As dawn broke over the frozen European horizon, Peterson strapped into his P-51D Mustang, a machine he knew better than he knew himself. Every switch, every throttle setting, every vibration of the Merlin engine had become second nature after hundreds of combat hours. But today would not be like any other day. This mission was not simply about escorting bombers or sweeping enemy airspace. This was a test of physics, endurance, and willpower, a challenge that would take Peterson and his Mustang beyond the operational envelope engineers had originally designed. The climb began smoothly enough. Peterson angled the Mustang's nose upward and let the turbo supercharger work. But the higher he climbed, the more the aircraft fought him. At 30,000 feet, the air became so thin that the controls felt mushy, unresponsive. At 35,000, frost crept across the canopy. The temperature dropped to nearly 80 degrees below zero, cold enough to freeze hydraulic fluid and crack steel. The Merlin engine coughed, sputtered, and roared again, begging for oxygen that no longer existed. Yet Peterson didn't turn back. He knew German high-altitude fighters were hunting the skies that day, confident that no Allied pilot would dare follow them. And that confidence made them vulnerable. With each 1,000-foot increment, Peterson risked hypoxia. His oxygen system strained, ice formed in the lines, and every breath became a conscious effort. His hands trembled, his vision tunneled. Still he climbed. At 40,000 feet, far higher than any Mustang was rated to fight, Peterson staggered at the edge of consciousness. The altimeter ticked upward. 41,000 feet, 42,000, and then he saw it. A lone Focke-Wulf Ta-152H, the pride of the Luftwaffe. Fastest climbing, highest flying piston-engine fighter ever built. German pilots believed the Ta-152 was untouchable at this altitude, that no Allied aircraft could possibly challenge it. Yet here Peterson was, one American pilot defying an entire doctrine. The Ta-152 pilot banked in surprise, stunned to see a Mustang reaching the stratosphere. Peterson pushed the throttle to the firewall. The Merlin engine screamed in agony as the Mustang's thin wings cut through air that felt more like vacuum than atmosphere. The dogfight began. Slow, drifting, almost dreamlike in the thin air, but deadly all the same. Every turn risked a stall. Every burst of fire drained precious oxygen from the engine's mixture. Peterson held steady, lined up his shot, and fired. A stream of tracers arced across the sky and tore into the Ta-152's fuselage. The German fighter spiraled downward, trailing smoke, defeated at the altitude where it was supposed to reign supreme. Peterson had done the impossible. He had proven that American fighters could reach the stratosphere, shattered German claims, and completed the highest piston-engine dogfight ever recorded in World War II. This was not just a victory. It was a message written in the frozen sky. Limits exist only until someone brave enough chooses to break them. When the Luftwaffe introduced the Focke-Wulf Ta-152H in the closing months of the war, they believed they had finally created a weapon capable of restoring air superiority, at least in the upper atmosphere. This long-winged, long-range, supercharged interceptor was designed for one purpose: dominate the stratosphere, far above the altitude where Allied bombers and escorts typically operated. German engineers conducted extensive tests, and their conclusions were bold. No Allied aircraft could effectively fight above 40,000 feet. The Americans, they insisted, simply did not have the technology. That belief shaped their strategy. The Ta-152H's service ceiling neared 50,000 feet, an altitude where most aircraft struggled to even fly, let alone maneuver. The air density was so low that wings produced barely enough lift. Engines gasped for oxygen. Gunpowder burned inconsistently. Oil thickened. Fuel lines froze. And pilots faced an invisible killer: hypoxia. The German high-altitude pilots trained rigorously for this environment, learning how to manage slow response controls and navigate thin-air aerodynamics. They saw themselves as elite, operating in a realm beyond the reach of American fighters. But the Luftwaffe miscalculated one thing: the determination of Allied pilots, especially those flying the battle-hardened P-51 Mustang. This was the aircraft that had escorted the 8th Air Force across Europe, cut down the Luftwaffe day after day, and broken Germany's air defense system. And pilots like Major Richard Peterson were not about to let new German claims go unchallenged. As the war neared its end, the Luftwaffe's desperation grew. Fuel shortages, inexperienced pilots, and collapsing infrastructure pushed them to rely heavily on high-altitude interception as a final defensive measure. Their hope was that the Ta-152 could operate in an aerial sanctuary, one where Allied escorts could not follow. For a short time, it seemed to work. Reports reached Allied intelligence: German fighters operating at 40 to 45,000 feet, diving down on bomber formations, then escaping back into thin air, where American Mustangs dared not chase them. But the Mustang had an ace up its sleeve. Its Merlin engine, built under license from Rolls-Royce, was remarkably resilient. Its two-stage supercharger gave it the theoretical capability to climb higher than its official specifications. Engineers knew it. A few daring pilots believed it. Peterson was determined to prove it. This tension, one side confident in technological superiority, the other driven by relentless adaptability, set the stage for the confrontation on March 17, 1945. That day, Peterson was not just hunting enemy aircraft, he was hunting a myth. The myth of German high-altitude invincibility. Every foot he climbed past 30,000 chipped away at that belief. Every minute he spent fighting the failing oxygen system posed a direct challenge to German assumptions. When he finally reached 42,000 feet and encountered the Ta-152, it wasn't simply a meeting of two aircraft. It was a meeting of two doctrines: the Luftwaffe doctrine of engineering supremacy versus the relentless, adversarial, never-quit mentality of the American Air Forces. And when Peterson fired the shots that brought the Ta-152 down, the German myth collapsed with it. The Ta-152H remained a remarkable machine, one of the most advanced piston-engine fighters ever made. But Peterson had shown the world that superiority claimed is not superiority proven. Even at the edge of the stratosphere, the outcome still depended on the pilot, on courage, improvisation, and the refusal to accept limits. Silence. The North American P-51 Mustang was many things: fast, agile, long-ranged, lethal. But it was not designed to fight at 40,000 feet. Its engineers optimized the aircraft for escorting heavy bombers at about 25 to 30,000 feet. Beyond that altitude, the risks multiplied steeply. Yet it was in this dangerous no-man's land of oxygen-starved skies that Major Richard Peterson chose to push his aircraft beyond its limits. To truly understand the magnitude of what he accomplished, we must understand what the Mustang endured during that climb. At extreme altitude, every component was stressed. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, for example, a masterpiece of wartime engineering, relied on a two-stage, two-speed supercharger to compress thin air and feed the cylinders with enough oxygen to keep combustion going. But as Peterson passed 35,000 feet, even the supercharger struggled. It whined under the strain, producing a high-pitched metallic howl that pilots described as almost unnatural. The engine began to misfire. The fuel mixture fluctuated. The slightest mistake in throttle control could cause the engine to flood or starve. The oil system was another threat. Oil thickens dramatically in extreme cold, and at 40,000 feet, temperatures can drop to -70 or even -80 degrees Fahrenheit. Thick oil flows poorly, reduces lubrication, and risks seizing the engine entirely. Pilots knew that an engine seizure at that altitude offered no second chances. A stall would send the aircraft into an unrecoverable spin. Peterson also battled a failing cockpit environment. Frost crawled across the canopy, narrowing his visibility. The cockpit heater barely functioned at such altitude, turning the interior into an icy coffin. His gloves stiffened. His breath crystallized. Every movement became a fight against numbing cold. But the greatest danger came from the lack of oxygen. Mustang pilots relied on a constant supply to avoid hypoxia, a condition where the brain is starved of oxygen. The symptoms start slowly: tingling fingers, dizziness, impaired judgment, but escalate rapidly into confusion, tunnel vision, and unconsciousness. At 40,000 feet, a pilot's window of useful consciousness can be less than 20 seconds without proper oxygen. Peterson's system iced up repeatedly. He had to manually adjust valves, shake the lines free, and force himself to stay alert. Despite everything, the Mustang climbed. Its wings, designed for lower altitudes, produced barely half their normal lift. Each turn felt mushy and imprecise. The aircraft wanted to stall. Yet Peterson kept it stable, coaxing every last foot of altitude from the machine. And then came the dogfight. At 42,000 feet, the Mustang and TA-152 moved like sluggish giants. Their controls lagged. Their engines wheezed. Gunfire drifted slowly, arcs tracing through air so thin the tracers seemed to float. But Peterson maintained discipline. His steady aim, refined over countless missions, allowed him to predict the TA-152's movements even in slow motion. When he squeezed the trigger, the Mustang's .50 caliber guns roared to life, despite the cold threatening to freeze the ammunition belts. In those few seconds, Peterson and his aircraft operated at the razor edge of mechanical and physical failure. Yet the Mustang held. The engine kept running. The guns fired true. And together, pilot and machine accomplished what engineers had not even dared to test. Long before Major Richard Peterson ever pulled the trigger at 42,000 feet, he had to survive the climb. And that climb was as much a psychological battle as a technical one. High-altitude combat placed enormous strain on pilots, pushing them far beyond normal combat stress and into a realm where every breath, every heartbeat, and every thought became a fight for survival. As Peterson began ascending through the thinning air, he felt the first signs immediately. His breathing quickened. His lungs fought for oxygen. Even with a functioning oxygen system, the body senses the change. The mind becomes hyper-aware, scanning for danger, for the subtle symptoms of hypoxia. Peterson knew the training protocols. Check your fingers for numbness. Check your vision for darkening edges. Check your thoughts for clarity. Because once hypoxia tightens its grip, a pilot may feel euphoric, confident, even as he is seconds from blackout. The cold made everything worse. At high altitude, the temperature difference between the cockpit and outside air can cause frostbite through gloves and numbness even under layers of flight gear. Peterson's fingers stiffened around the control stick. His jaw locked with cold. His teeth chattered so violently that some pilots reported biting the inside of their cheeks without noticing. A moment of distraction could lead to a stall. A brief lapse in oxygen flow could end the mission and his life. In this fragile state, the pilot's mind becomes its own battlefield. Isolation magnifies fear. Silence amplifies anxiety. And the realization that you are flying higher than any Allied fighter was ever meant to fly adds a weight no aircraft instrument can measure. Yet Peterson remained focused. His training allowed him to compartmentalize the fear, the physical discomfort, and the constant threat of unconsciousness. He performed constant oxygen checks. He tapped the lines to break forming ice. He scanned the gauges again and again. When Peterson finally spotted the TA-152H, exhaustion gave way to adrenaline. But even adrenaline moves differently at 40,000 feet. The body cannot metabolize it efficiently. The rush is muted. Reaction time slow. The mind must work twice as hard to stay sharp. The dogfight tested every shred of Peterson's psychological endurance. Maneuvering while hypoxic feels like trying to run underwater. Thoughts slow, decisions take longer. But Peterson's experience, his muscle memory, his training, his instinct, carried him through decisions his conscious mind could barely process. When he fired the fatal burst, it wasn't just a technical victory. It was a human one. A triumph of discipline, resilience, and sheer willpower. For at that altitude, the pilot's greatest enemy is not the aircraft across the sky, but the limits of the human body itself.